Welcome everybody, and I think this is actually our 19th weekly call, and we'll be continuing these throughout the year. Just a quick update from my end before we hand over to today's speakers, and a quick reminder that if you've not been on our calls, and I think most of you have now, please remain on mute until maybe you've got a question, in which case use the chat box at the bottom of the screen, little green chat box there. If you want to also engage in some interactive conversations, we'll give you the opportunity at the end to do a Q&A with both Annabel and with Ollie. As before, as you now just heard, we're recording this. That's to enable those people who are unable to attend today to be able to catch up later on the Pimento Agency YouTube channel. So if you go there, there's a wealth of really good content from all our previous events, both this year and last year. So apologies, I wanted to do a little bit of a rant this morning, not about you, so don't worry. But I suspect, like everyone, you've all seen and felt perhaps angry, maybe even upset by the reaction of the number of the so-called fans to Sunday night's game. I was in town, I was just explaining to everyone, I was in town on Monday morning, 8:30, and Leicester Square was disgusting, it was unbelievable. It really was poor. And I, like all of you, I felt frankly pretty much ashamed to call myself English by the mess that had been left behind. And this was before the game. Regardless of whether you like football or not, it's just a clear demonstration to me that as a country, we seem to be losing the plot. The three young heroes get that amount of offline and online racial abuse. I mean, Marcus Rashford, what he's done for this country in the last 18 months, 2 years, Jadon Sancho rather, and Bukayo Saka were all really the targets of racial abuse, both on social media platforms after we lost the tournament on Sunday evening. Facebook and Twitter, so they acted quickly to remove posts and accounts. I don't know whether they did. I don't think they did. I don't think they did enough. And I think we need to kind of hold them to account, as well as obviously the people who are responsible for peddling such hate. The British government, it's all very well, they're saying they're aiming to crack down on large tech companies over the proliferation of harmful content, but equally too, I think they shoulder some of the blame, and particularly the lack of consistency in the communication that's coming out of Number 10 over this particular issue. The reason why I think this is important to all of us, not least of which because it goes beyond common decency, is that the need to defeat racism in this country, wherever it exists. I guess as agencies and brand managers, we need to hold social media platforms to account. We spend millions of our clients' marketing pounds on such platforms every year. So I guess we have a responsibility to get involved at times like this. Many of you know Tina Vigant. Tina is a procurement specialist, also happens to be the co-chair of Get Shit Done, which is a board for the Conscientious Advertising Network. I'll put their web address in the side notes in a moment. They've got 6 manifestos, and they're trying to get brands and agencies to sign up and support topics such as fake news, children's well-being, and of course hate speech. And they are asking members of the communications industry to sign up and support a letter that they'll be sending to the CEOs of Facebook, Instagram, Twitter, and Snapchat. So again, I'll publish a copy of the letter. If you feel like you want to lend your agency's name or your own name to the letter, which will be going to those CEOs, then please do so. This is not political, beyond the fact that I think we all share the need for common decency, and we all, I think, believe that obviously whilst social media is a powerful good, it can also be at times a weapon if it's misused, as it has been this weekend. Right, enough of that. Let's focus on what we're going to talk about today. I'd like to welcome back both Oliver Wright, who comes from Savanta, and Annabel Dunstan, who you all know from Question and Retain. They're going to be presenting their quarterly updates on consumer and business sentiment, and an update on the work that Annabel's been doing with the Alliance of Independent Agencies. She does now a quarterly tracker and reports on agency sentiment for the independent category, so it's people like you. She's now got data for the fourth quarter of 2020, quarter 1 of this year, and quarter 2 now. She's also going to invite you to participate in the next round, and I'd strongly encourage you to do that because it's free. Oliver's rolling survey, as you know, provides both brands and agencies with an accurate, up-to-date view on how the UK, US and other markets are feeling and coping throughout the pandemic. The tracker covers five key areas: concern and impact of COVID, home and work, out of home and retail, news sources and political approval ratings, which is always quite interesting. We'll have to see how certain people are doing. See the Mac Hancock rating. So what we're going to do is we're going to start with Annabel. She's got a few charts to present. We'll make those charts available to you afterwards. And then Annabel will then pass over to Ollie, and then we'll open it up for questions if that's okay. All right then. So Annabel, the floor, as they say, is yours. I'll put the spotlight on you.
Thanks, Stephen. And yeah, just to echo what you started off with, we're all appalled by what happened. But I just think as a group of creative agencies, we've got incredible power because we have the voice, we have the ear of the CEOs of all the clients we serve. So we've got incredible kind of spider-like influence that we could use to great effect. So please try and think of that in any conversations you're having with your client and particularly the leadership teams. We can create change on this racism card, definitely. Right, enough, I will move on. So let me share my screen. Does that look like I've shared it? And let me make that full screen. Are you seeing it in full screen, Stephen? Cool. So yes, thank you to everybody that's taken part in this. If you haven't yet, then Teresa has very kindly just shared the link in the chat function, so you'll be able to take part in the 4th wave of the People Pulse that we run in alliance with the run in conjunction with the Alliance of Independent Agencies. So this, we actually created a deck for you instead of a one-pager because we've got quite a lot of data to share with you. But you can see from our pretty infographics that the number of responses have trebled since we started this back at the back end of last year, from 99 to over 300. So it's gaining momentum, which is always good to see. And we know that when we share the results back to you, we're getting really interesting feedback and comments afterwards. So I think it's serving a good purpose. So please do get involved. Number of agencies that responded, again, that's doubled from 21 to 46. And those that had more than 6 responses per agency has also increased significantly. So just to remind you, if your agency has 6 or more responses, you then get a tailored report just for your agency versus the aggregates that we produce. So you get thousands of pounds worth of value from just getting 6 people or more in your agencies to get involved. So please do share that link after the meeting today. Great stuff. So we have got, I think it's 8 questions, possibly 9, but we start with pride. Do you feel proud to work at your agencies and your agency? And you'll see, as ever, the bar on the right is the most current, so the boldest bar showing 64%. So hovering around 2/3 of agency staff feeling some pride. And then we've dropped in some comments, the green, the happiest, through to the blue, feeling less sure and perhaps disjointed. So I suggest that when you look at this deck, just read those comments. And is that the kind of, are your people saying the green stuff, or are they saying the blue and the red stuff? Where does that sit with your team right now? And if you haven't got a gut feel, then certainly questions to be asking, but putting metrics in there really helps you to see whether you're turning wheels or not. So yeah, pride holding steady around 2/3. Respect, you encouraged to voice your opinions and ideas. And I think this is in a very strong place, 3/4 saying yes. And I think with pandemic, that's probably increased the opportunity for people to have their say, whatever level they sit in the agency. And in some ways, I think it's been a huge leveller. The hierarchies, the offices that people might have occupied are now completely blown apart. We're all looking at the people's bookshelves now. So I think respect for one another is a very strong place. But then we have got this minority, 3% saying on the surface we're invited to, but in reality I'm not sure they want to hear my views, just in case they cause more stress. But obviously that's just a few voices, but a watch point that you might have 1 or 2 in your ranks who are saying that. So really important to keep listening. What are your people feeling and thinking? Trust, gradually nudging up, 72%. Here's my cat, hello cat, nudged up from 72 to 77%. are you trusted to get on and do a good job? And yes, especially since working from home full time. Now, I think this has been a really fantastic thing in lots of ways around the flexible working. It's moved the agenda on by a decade in just 18 short months. People having to work from home, but demonstrating they can be just as productive and in many cases even more productive. Obviously, there's a flip side to that with burnout and people feeling like they always need to be on to prove that they're working. And that's, again, a role for us as leaders to make sure that we encourage our teams to have balance there. 2% in Q2 is just saying often too much, which feels like my development is suffering as I'm not learning from anyone more senior. So perhaps some people feeling slightly adrift from the anchor of an office life where you get noticed, you get put forward for stuff. So watch out for those that don't say so much on Zoom calls, that are perhaps leaving their camera off in an all team setting. The quieter ones, they're the ones that need that extra TLC. Whether you've got a head of wellbeing or an HR or a head of people, they need to be picking up on those that are perhaps less visible, less vocal than perhaps before, because that's your 2% who are feeling a little out on a limb. D&I, very apt, and I'm really glad we've got this question in. Is your agency taking positive steps to improve D&I? And we're about halfway, 49%. It has increased slightly from back in Q4. I think the Black Lives Matter obviously has kickstarted a lot of people to make greater strides in this direction. If you haven't seen it, Q&R, we've got a YouTube channel called Listen Better, and Sammy McCabe from Clarity PR is doing a tremendous amount in this space. And so as an agency leader, I think he's a great one to emulate in how you can embed D&I values and get people having those conversations that you might be fearful about. And there's some brilliant support out there, and I can happily point you in the right direction if you're looking to bring in external consultants to help you on your D&I agenda. But again, we've got 15% plus the 7, so 22% sitting, and I've got the little thumbnails over that bit, so I can't see the last figure, 1%. So a total of 23% in the unsure, not really, and not at all. So 1 in 4 of your agency staff, representative of your agency staff, are not particularly pleased with where it sits. So a tremendous opportunity for you to ring the changes, because the talent of the future will be looking to you on your record on this. Good. Learning and development. We all know that, and this is obviously a plug for the services that Alliance offer, which is training and development. It's really important you continue to invest in your team, even in difficult times. It's shown that if in recession you continue to invest in learning, development and training, you will emerge able to take on the green shoots of recovery better than those that have languished and not invested. So do keep your training budget high and focused. So 52%, just hovering around that halfway mark, feeling with the comments along the lines of regular training sessions and workshops for us to join. Some are optional and some are mandatory. We also have a scheme where we, if we'd like to gain a qualification, the company will help fund part of the fees. So tremendous incentive for those people to stick and stay loyal to that company if they're being invested in that way. And then conversely, we've got nearly 25% in the unsure to not at all. And understandably, some have just frozen that budget. It's an easy one to freeze, but I do implore you, where you can, to look at training. It may not cost anything. It's how you package what you're already doing internally with teams. Are you, a lot of work happens on the job, which would have happened perhaps desk by desk in the before times. Now with hybrid working, can you pair up people to learn stuff from one another aside from the day-to-day and package that as training and development? Because that helps people to feel that they're doing something beyond ticking all the boxes on behalf of clients. So yeah, I'm passionate about learning and development. Job security. How secure do you feel your job is? This is probably interesting trend, and it's gone from 28 up to 35%. So a nudge in the right direction. I think back in Q4 2020, we were still worried about furlough and where that might end. From anecdotal stuff I'm picking up, a lot more briefs coming through, so that has a knock-on effect. Job security increases, and some great comments there. I feel we've done an amazing job of protecting our reserves and keeping everyone employed through the lockdown months. And then we've obviously got some doubt there with 14% saying who knows what the future holds, of course. And that will come down to the strength of the leadership, the strength of your internal comms as well. Job security is very linked to how well you as leaders communicate what's going on. And even if, you know, the proverbial is hitting the fan, it's how you're dealing with that, how you react, and it's how you walk the talk around where we're going as an agency. So internal comms plays a big role in this, and settling the ripples that might happen if an account goes, or there's someone leaves the agency. So yeah, internal comms, big focus there. Leadership and comms, how clearly is leadership communicated? So yes, back to that point, job security. It's dropping down from 45 to 39, 6 percentage points, a little decrease there in the really clearly. And I guess that is partly due to the fact that we are remote working. People have very different working patterns. Perhaps it is harder to have those huddle moments where we say what's going on. The best agencies I talk to have really kept up with that momentum that was really in its full flush, probably May, June, July last year, of creating online versions of the full team huddle. So perhaps refresh the pot. You've got a hybrid model now, so people coming and going at different times. Can you have a sense that when you all come together by the week to hear updates and to share the good, the bad and the ugly? And so some comments there sitting, for such a small agency, there isn't much communication and transparency. So that can be a problem with small agencies, particularly if it's owner managed, and we are here as independent agencies. So that says for all of us, it's easy to keep the bad news close and not share that. But I think in this age of authenticity and, dare I say it, truth, we can afford to, I think, be much more open around what's really happening, and people get comfort from that and want to then go the extra mile to show that loyalty. Does the company live its values? Pretty hard in hybrid times, I suppose, potentially. And we've seen a little drop off from 50 down to 41%. So those of you that it's worth testing, do your team know the values, and are you living them to the full? So we've got one comment there, just representing 4 or 5 people, saying, I'm not sure most of the agency would be aware of the values. So again, just a watch point. Can you hand on heart say that everyone in your agency is really clear what you're all about and where you're headed and what those values are that you need to get there? Good questions just to ask yourself when you get time to work on your business, not in your business. And then, do you live the company values? So the flip side of that, and similarly hovering around 41% saying that they do live the company values. But again, we've got some saying they're not sure what the values are. So really important in this age when particularly millennials, Gen Z coming into work, it's not just about the salary they earn and the job title, it's really about what the company purpose is and how people treat each other around here. So you need to be spot on with that. But in a pretty healthy state, we've got 86% in total saying yes, or for the most part, but work to do in the other areas. Mental health, we asked this for the first time in Q1 and then repeated that in Q2, and of course we'll have that in Q3. And it's on the NPS scale of -100 to 100. It was in a pretty poor state back in the beginning of the year, and it's risen 12 percentage points, which is the right direction. And I'm pretty sure that with the easing of restrictions after the 19th of July, we'll still have a medium mental health picture, but I think it will be going in the right direction. Just so you know, 0 is reasonable. Anything above 0 starts to get good. So I hope we see a score above 0 after this next wave, which we'll announce the results for in late August, early September, I expect. Good. So yes, again, thinking back to your own agency, where do you think that sits? Have you got some people at the very end of that scale, or have you got some very happy people? Where is the average for your agency right now? And that is me. I've galloped through. I hope I've held your interest. I can't tell because I can't see all your faces whilst I'm presenting. But do feel free to ask any questions either now or at the end, or after by email. Always happy to have a chat and share my thinking. Thank you, Stephen.
Okay. We can do a bit of questions now if you want, or do you want to do it at the end? I don't mind. Whilst it's still fresh in everyone's mind. You're on mute.
If people want to ask now, I think that's probably easier whilst it's fresh in minds. Any particular thoughts that come up?
Okay, so just looking around the gallery of all our talented members and friends here today. Does anyone actually have any questions, particularly as maybe as it relates to your business? And if you were one of the participants in the last round, as Pimento was, whether you've seen any noticeable changes in your organisation, or whether you think as we move towards Freedom Day, unless of course you're in Scotland, Lindsay there, whether that's going to have any material impact. We were talking before you came on the call to Ollie about the fact that Savanta went back to the office last week for a day, I think it was, or 2 days before they had to close because somebody came back with COVID. So it is a very much a moving picture. But if anyone's got any particular questions they'd like to fire at Annabel or would like to get involved, there is in the chat box a link to the next round of the survey. It takes, I think, about 5 minutes to do max, and you get your own version of the survey if you've got more than 6 employees in your business and 6 people actually, I think I'm right in saying this, actually complete the survey. You get your own mini report that shows how your agency is against the group as a whole. So it's a useful tool. And all of this is sponsored and put together by the Alliance of Independent Agencies. I saw Clive dropped onto the call, so thank you, Clive, for allowing us to share this data with the members today.
Also to add, we've added in a question around feelings about returning to the office. So that will be quite interesting. If you haven't already asked your team, then jump on this and you get the opportunity to see where you sit against all the other agencies. Okay.
All right, well, unless there's any questions, which doesn't appear to be, unless someone puts their hand up or comes off mute, we will move on. Thank you very much once again, Annabel. And we'll move on now to Oliver. Oliver, I'll make you place the spotlight there. Man in the dark.
Can you see me okay?
Good, yeah. It's with the black polo neck, etc. You've got a floating head. It's brilliant.
It's a slightly black background, isn't it?
That's good, though. It's good.
Anyway, I'll share my screen anyway and show you some slides, so you don't have to look at my floating head. Just bear with me a moment while I do that. So yeah, I'm going to give you all an update on where our what our latest polling is showing in relation to coronavirus for both the public and businesses. And I think it's just a really interesting time now as we reach what's been kind of called the terminus date and Freedom Day and various other things in the weeks running up to it. And it's obviously coming up on Monday, and we at Savanta have given everybody the day off. It was something that had been planned for a while, and I think we all thought it would be maybe a lot more celebratory than maybe it will be now that we're seeing cases going up so much. And I personally know people who are testing positive at the moment. I'm personally self-isolating, as Stephen said, because someone I came into contact with tested positive in the office last week. So I think we're in for potentially a bumpy ride over the next few weeks, and I think that's interesting context for kind of how the public particularly are feeling at the moment. For those of you who've been to these presentations before, you might notice that some of the stuff I'm sharing is a little bit different. We have stopped tracking some of the metrics that we have been since the start of the pandemic, things like people's level of concern and disposable income, things like that, because things weren't really changing. Concern kind of went up and down a little bit when cases went up and down, but it wasn't really showing us anything new. So instead, our polling is kind of focused on the issues of the day, and I think they tell a nice story kind of about how the public are feeling at the moment. The business tracking has continued, and I'll share the latest results of that, as has the approval ratings of our dear politicians. So 3 sections. First up will be how the public feel about Freedom Day and the current restrictions or not. Then what's the mood of business, and then finally, how does that reflect on people, how people feel about our politicians and the Prime Minister. So I think what's been really interesting throughout the whole pandemic in the polling we've done is that the public have constantly backed lockdowns and restrictions. They might see them as an inconvenience, but they've always found them to be, or seen them as necessary, and they support them. And I think that still continues to come through. So when we asked this question back in June, when we found that the Freedom Day date, the step 4 date, was being pushed back 4 weeks to the 19th of July. We asked people, what do you think of that? Only a very small minority, around 1 in 8, felt that it should have stayed as it was on the 21st of June. 3 in 10 said, okay, fine, let's go with the 19th of July now. We understand the reasons for pushing back. But 4 in 10 at that point, and I suspect it will be very similar now, if not higher, felt that the easing of the restrictions should not happen until a later date, and even 1 in 10 saying, wait till next year. So there is a significant proportion of the population who are not necessarily looking forward to Freedom Day, and certainly don't support it. And with the lifting of restrictions, I think we've seen the narrative from the government that the onus is very much being pushed onto the public now, in terms of, be responsible, use your common sense. We're removing the legal requirement to wear face masks, but we still expect you to do so. It's very much pushing the responsibility onto the public. I think what we see from the polling is that the government seems to have, successfully shaped that narrative, and we see more of the blame being put on the public than the government for the current situation. So this question relates to the delay in lifting of restrictions from June to July, and more say that the public were to blame for that delay than the government. That's particularly true of older people and Conservative voters compared with younger people and Labour voters, which possibly reflects older people seeing younger people going out and mixing and blaming them for it. But I think that sort of shift in terms of narrative of the government wanting the public to take responsibility has also had the knock-on impact of the public blaming themselves and others in society rather than the government. And in similar vein there, we see that over half the public feel that they themselves and others can't be trusted to take appropriate measures to protect themselves from coronavirus, and actually that the rules should continue as they were. Emphasising again, I think that the public is seen as being more at fault than the government for the way things are panning out now. So whether that was a deliberate communication strategy from the government, one suspects it might be, it seems to be working. And when it comes to what are the most important factors in deciding when to lift restrictions, in the eyes of the public, things like number of people in hospital, number of deaths, number of cases, number of vaccines, they're all seen as far more important than the loss of personal freedoms, which is on the far right of that chart. So again, sort of demonstrating that the public want decisions to be driven by the science and the reality at the expense of, maybe at least in the short to medium term, the loss of freedoms if we need to stay with greater restrictions. And this pattern of supporting restrictions and the science is seen again when it comes to face mask. And we see here that the public are more likely to want face masks to remain as a requirement on public transports and in shops than not support that. We see that people are split on requirements on social distancing, but there is support for ending the rule of 6 of meeting indoors. But I think what this shows is that with the government wanting people to take the personal responsibility, a lot of people, the majority of people, are generally likely to support face masks being mandatory. And when we ask outright, okay, will you keep doing this? We see clear majorities of people, 3/4 of people saying that, okay, I get this, I need to play my part here. I'm going to keep wearing my face mask on public transport. I'm going to keep wearing my face mask in shops and supermarkets and while queuing in busy places. So I think what we'll see after Monday is a lot of face masks still being worn. And obviously, Sadiq announced last night that face masks will be mandatory on TfL services. And our polling backs up that will be popular. So 73% of Londoners in this poll said that they would continue wearing a face mask on public transport. So that's not going to be controversial amongst the majority of the population. One of the only real remaining ways that the government has left at its disposal to kind of limit the spread of the disease is through the NHS test and trace system. And these figures are hot off the press. We published them yesterday. And I think what it's showing is that things might go a bit more pear-shaped, because only 2 in 5 people currently have the NHS COVID app on their mobile phones. 1 in 5 used to have it, but have since deleted it. And that rises to 1/3 of 18 to 34-year-olds, the people who are most likely to only have 1 jab or no jabs, and possibly the most likely to be out socializing, particularly around some of the recent events with the European Championships. And I think what's interesting here is this is maybe one of the only apps where we'll see that more people aged 55 and over have that on their phone than people aged 18 to 34. And potentially more worryingly, on top of that, when we ask, what are you going to do on Monday? We see that of those who do have the app, a further 1 in 5 are planning to delete it on Monday. So that's going to leave vast swathes of the population without the app, and mean the government unable to use the test and trace system effectively. And again, that's much more going to be the case for younger people, another 1/3 of 18 to 34-year-olds who currently have it, saying they're going to delete it, which is potentially worrying. And this is one of the only levers the government has left in terms of trying to control things themselves. We might see that falling down over the next few weeks. So all of this, I think, very much successfully will add to the narrative that the public are to blame. The public deleted their app. It's not the government's fault. And just one thing which I haven't got on the slide, because it was literally put out on our social media at 11 o'clock today, emphasising again the support that public have for sort of restrictions and using the science and doing what they feel that is necessary to control the disease. There is majority support for people under 18 to get vaccinated. 60%, 61% said they support that. Only 10% said they oppose vaccinations to people under 18. But will it ever end? I think what's interesting here, we see majorities of all age groups are genuinely concerned that restrictions will stay in place indefinitely. And I think there is now a realization, people are resigned to the fact that we will never achieve zero COVID. So all of this, I think, makes for a bumpy few weeks. We're likely to see face masks very much widespread, and I think people will remain quite cautious in their behaviours over the next few weeks, particularly while cases keep going up. So it might not be quite the freedom day the government had planned or that we had envisaged. The second section is around businesses. What's the view from businesses across the country? And we continue to track how businesses are feeling, as we've done since the start of the pandemic. We split the responses into SMEs and then larger businesses to reflect likely different experiences and impacts of the pandemic. And we continue to see large impacts from the pandemic. So negative impact, either significant or slight. 2/3 of businesses, both small, which is the top bars there, and larger businesses, 2/3 basically saying they have had some kind of negative impact from the pandemic. Signs that maybe it's starting to fall away, particularly amongst larger businesses. That's fallen from 70% in the last wave that we ran of this. We've sort of put Brexit in there as a comparison, and we see that the Brexit impact is not as widespread. So only 33% of SMEs and 47% of larger businesses saying that they've had a negative impact from Brexit. Still significant numbers of businesses though, but it's less of an issue, particularly for small businesses. So COVID's still very much having an impact. And with these impacts likely to be impacting revenues, we see a significant proportion of businesses not confident still of surviving COVID. So 3/4 of businesses saying, yes, we're confident of surviving, both SMEs and larger ones, the red bars there. But that leaves, again, and we've said this, I think every wave we presented, still a quarter saying they're not confident. That's been consistent through the pandemic. represents a lot of businesses and employees across the country. And as we've moved through the steps out of lockdown, I think we'd hope to see some more positive impacts for businesses over that period, both in terms of customers returning and therefore revenues improving. And after we moved out of step 3 on the 17th of May, we asked businesses whether they were starting to see any positive impacts or not. The good news is that at least some were. So around half of larger businesses were saying they'd seen some positive impacts on their business as a result of moving out of step 3. Fewer small businesses, but still a third. And I think that discrepancy between smaller and larger businesses can be explained potentially by kind of the difference in smaller businesses needing, in terms of their activities, what they're likely doing, possibly needing to move to step 4 and ease restrictions more fully to start seeing more positive impacts within those sort of sectors. And we see this, I think, more clearly on this slide in terms of the impact when it comes to revenue. So larger businesses on the right of this slide, a half have seen increase in sales and revenue, but only a third, 3 in 10 of smaller businesses have, whereas a half have seen no change. So just emphasises that point that at the moment, maybe larger businesses have started to see some pickup, but SMEs still waiting, and things aren't necessarily getting worse for the majority. Only 16% say they're seeing a decline, but it's very much kind of at a standstill for the majority. And then looking to the future, once we do end all restrictions, so this is thinking about final stages of lockdown. What's your business likely to do? I think we've seen throughout businesses wanting to make changes, and things like remote working likely to be embraced and built into the way businesses work. What we're seeing here is that 93%, so nearly all large businesses, are saying, look, we're going to make some changes after the main parts of COVID are over, even 70% of smaller businesses. But what those changes are possibly a little bit different. I think because we're seeing revenues already increasing within larger businesses, they're much more likely to say they're going to hire more staff than smaller businesses, where for smaller businesses the focus is very much on, okay, how can we be agile, how can we adapt, what new innovations can we put in place, how can we open up new revenue streams. So still, I think a bit of wait and see for businesses. What's the impact going to be of step 4? Very much going to be tied into the behaviours of consumers, and I think from the first slides there, we've seen that there are potentially some doubts over a return to normality, certainly immediately. But how does this all kind of reflect on ratings of the government? Well, we can see here from these lines, this rates favourability, net favourability towards each of these individuals. Boris Johnson is the purple line there. The green line is the UK government, so they understandably track each other very much. We see that after both approval ratings for both Boris Johnson and the government moving up through this year, as vaccines started to get rolled out, as case numbers went down, we then saw a dip in June as cases started going up with the Delta variant. It'll be really interesting to see what the July figures show. We don't quite have them yet. This is done on a monthly basis, and they're going to be available next week. So it'll be interesting to see if that downward trend continues. Rishi Sunak still sort of seen comparatively favourably in terms of others. Matt Hancock, we have been tracking through this as well. Again, this is the June rating, so I think his indiscretions maybe are not reflected in here, but he also saw a bit of a dip through June compared with May. However, when it comes to asking, who's going to be who would make the best prime minister, Boris Johnson still very much seen as likely to be seen as the best prime minister. If you see, going back to January there, things were a lot closer, 38% Boris Johnson, 31% Keir Starmer. That's widened through the year. And despite Labour scraping through in Batley and Spen in the by-election there, I think Keir Starmer's still got a lot of work to do to cut through the majority of the electorate, and that is very much shown in the overall voting intention polling, which has fluctuated a little bit, but this still translates into a healthy leading the polls for the Tories and would give a majority in Parliament still. So despite the stuff we're seeing here and people wanting not necessarily wanting restrictions to end, wanting to keep wearing face masks, the government putting the blame potentially on the public, it's not cutting through in terms of likelihood to vote, and you could argue therefore their strategies are working. So that's what I was going to present to you today, and yeah, as ever, happy to take any questions.
Thank you very much indeed. If you could just take the slide off, brilliant. Thank you very much, Charlie. It's fascinating to see actually the way Boris is playing the game and actually shifting the blame, because you can't really blame Matt anymore because he's gone. So that's it on the British public and give them the decision to screw it up. But it does seem somewhat alarming when we're getting upwards of 50,000 new cases a day. And was it 50 people died yesterday? What we're not getting information on, I don't think, unless anyone's seen it, I'd be interested if you can share it, is a profile of the unfortunate people who are dying. Are these people who have been double vaccinated? Are these people who are older, perhaps have some underlying health conditions? Or are these younger people who haven't had any vaccinations or come from a particular community? I suppose that would be quite telling, because it would allow more direction and I guess more encouragement of people to have the vaccine if they haven't already had the vaccine, particularly among those groups who have been anti-vax to this point. So I'm surprised that data is not being made available. But has anyone seen that?
I haven't seen. I've sort of heard anecdotally that maybe I think that the deaths are still more likely to be people who aren't double jabbed and have underlying health conditions. But I think stuff I've seen from hospitalizations is that more and more younger people are being admitted to hospital than in previous waves, although they are staying there for a shorter period of time.
Simon, you've got some more.
Yeah, well, just anecdotally from a top ICU nurse at the John Radcliffe in Oxford, she said that the seriously ill people they're seeing are single jabbed people in their 40s with underlying health conditions.
And that would make sense, wouldn't it?
Yeah.
And it's also interesting that a lot, I'm now hearing, and Jeremy, you had COVID last week, didn't you? And you've had 2 vaccines.
Yep, I had my son came back from a school trip in Wales for a week. He had a boy in his minibus, had COVID. He came down on his 12th birthday with COVID, and I picked it up from him the following day. He's now through it and he's fine. If you have been double jabbed and you get COVID, it's likely it'll pass through quicker. The symptoms won't be quite so severe. You'll recover faster. But yeah, it's not, it's a 20% chance that you'll still get it. It's 20% of people who are double jabbed can still get COVID, and I'm one of those people. So yeah, but the symptoms aren't terrible. I mean, I can't smell a thing, can't taste a thing, which is really weird. But it's usually it's runny noses, headaches, sort of flu symptoms, but nothing like as dramatic as some of the cases you've been hearing. I haven't got any underlying health complaints, so I'm sort of fine. I'm getting through the end of it now. But yeah, I mean, it was a shock, because you think you've got this sort of a blanket of protection, don't you? I've been double jabbed, hooray, I'm fine. And you're not necessarily, which is what a lot of people just don't realize. I certainly didn't. I didn't really think about it enough. But anyway, I'm fine. But a lot of people won't be. As you say, Simon, if you've been single jabbed and you have underlying conditions, then you are vulnerable. So which is why I think the whole mask thing is a bit ridiculous, personally. Anyway, different conversation.
No, I mean, but yeah, it's interesting. Thank you, Annabel. She's just dropped into the chat box there, the link that takes you through down by region of when this is occurring. But it comes back politically to what is going to be acceptable, I guess, assuming that obviously the NHS can actually cope with a significant rise in the number of people being admitted to hospital. What is going to be acceptable in a society that is desperately keen to get back to work and keen to regrow the economy? And it comes down to the blunt fact that it's 50 might be acceptable a day, 100 might be acceptable a day, it's 1,000. It's a very, very difficult and slightly weird time that we're now living in, where you're trading off deaths against the economy in such a blunt way, and then pushing back the responsibility on the individual. And clearly, as I mentioned, we're not very good at taking responsibility, as so evidenced on Sunday. So I think there's a lot of things happening at the same time. It's good to see that Scotland is sticking with the plan, as are Wales. And the mixed messaging that continues to go on in the south or in England will continue to add to confusion, I suspect, and the blame game will be in full force by the time we get to October, and the R rate is pushing too. But let's not be doom layers. Let's look at the positives, and it's quite interesting to see some of the really interesting data that you share with us today coming through. Clive, you've got a question.
Yeah, thanks, Stephen. No, I was just wanted to relay. We had the Ad Association call this morning on COVID recovery, where we had government departments on, and they are trying to get out an update prior to Monday, Freedom Day. And my take out from that was they are really in two places. They want everything to go back to normal, but on the other hand, they're saying don't go back to normal. The number of cases going up is putting them in a real quandary. So I think the guidelines are going to be very much geared towards go back to work very slowly. And I think the key thing I wanted to relay here was somebody asked is whose responsibility is if somebody comes into the office because they can come into the office and they get COVID, whose responsibility is it? And could there be a case? And there wasn't a clear answer to that. So it's our putting responsibilities onto individuals. So I'm not sure the government quite know where they stand. They desperately want there to be things opening up, but there's going to be a very mixed message coming out soon, I think.
Thank you for that, Clive. And sorry, I stand corrected that it was actually not 50,000, as I said, it was 36,000 people with new cases yesterday, but very much the trend is heading up towards 50. And there has been some conversation, I think in a press meeting, I think Boris said that 100,000 would be acceptable. There was some suggestion it was likely to head in that direction before it got better.
Yeah, but it's the difference between personal responsibility and us as employers being corporate responsibility, and where's our responsibility lie and where does individuals' responsibility lie, and that's the quandary for us as employers.
Yeah, and there also needs to be, I think, more freedom of choice. So a lot of businesses are now, saying you must come back, and are suggesting that if you don't go back, then your jobs may be threatened. Again, I don't know the legal position on that either. We'll have to get our friends from Reality HR onto the next call to find out where we all stand. Okay, so any questions on the data that Ollie has just shared? Anything that you feel perhaps that they may be considering or should be considering for the next wave? I know you've got some questions have come off, which generally speaking means there may be some room to add new questions if we think there's new emerging trends coming through or things that your clients are saying to you or your own personal opinions. Feel free to share those thoughts. I can't promise that they'll be put onto it, but this is an evolving picture, and we are in a very much a state of flux again. So if you've got a couple of questions coming in here now. So first of all, another question, Paul Hackett.
Good morning, everyone. Thanks, Stephen. This is not intended at all to put Oliver on the spot, because it may be a question that it isn't possible to answer just yet. So apologies in advance. But just listening to the data that Oliver was sharing, and then Clive's narrative about the meeting that he sat in on earlier on today, I just wonder, do you have any sense at all as to whether people feel properly or fully informed when you're asked to make a decision about something? You call on either what information you have or what you've been told or what feelings you have about that. Part of the reason for the question is that we were on a call earlier on today with some folks who are quite closely associated with something called the New Health and Care Bill, which was first introduced to the House of Commons on the 6th of July. I won't ramble on, but its intention is to reorganise NHS England in such a way that it takes away budget responsibility and hands it over to a public-private body that will be called the Integrated Care Board, if this bill is accepted and passed by government or Parliament. Very quickly, what that means is that NHS trusts, as we know them, their powers of expenditure will be capped. And that means that if we, the consumer or a patient, receives treatment that goes beyond that particular cap, then we, the consumer patient, will be asked to make up the difference. It draws on totally the US definition of a health maintenance organization. And it's interesting that none, absolutely none of the main press have picked this up at all or are covering it. And you can't help but get the sense that there's a lot of stuff going on in the background for all kinds of reasons, I'm sure, that the ordinary people are probably either completely unaware of or poorly informed about.
Yeah, I mean, we don't sort of go into that level of detail with the polling, really. I think when we ask these questions, people will have different levels of knowledge that they base their answers on. I think the example you give there, I'm pretty sure I could safely say a very small minority would know about that. I think one insight the data does give to this is that the information that is very readily available is around number of cases, number of deaths, number of hospitalizations, number of jabs, and that seems to be those are the sort of things which people are, saying these are the areas we need to be, have at the top of the list when the government is making decisions on this. I think they are the key stats which we get hammered home every day on the news, that are governing kind of how people feel about everything.
Thank you for that question. Okay, I was actually going to ask a question. Julian, I don't know whether you saw I popped a question there into the box there.
No, Stephen. No, I didn't see it. Let me have a look.
No problem. I'll put you on the spot, mate. Just want to get a view from what's happening in your market, and if you could tell a bit tell the guys about where you're based and what you guys do.
Sure. Well, I might sound British, but I'm now Swedish. So I've got a Swedish passport. I was born in Britain and moved over here about 25 years ago. So it's very interesting to contrast the situation here with the situation in the UK. So over here, in general, over the last 14 months, the government has had a policy of be sensible, don't kiss strangers, keep a distance, wear a mask when it makes sense, be sensible. And that's been pretty much it. Legislation has been very, very minimal. So restaurants have remained open. You go in and there's gaps between tables, and they closed them at 10 o'clock at night. That was in the toughest part of the restrictions. So they had a few limitations, but not so many. And business went on and society went on. And I mean, the only way I think you can make a comparison in terms of, okay, did we handle it well or did we handle it badly? Well, firstly, nobody's handled it well. Everybody's had failures of different sorts, and we had them in care homes here. The fact is, when you look at the statistics of, say, deaths per million, we're about number 30 or 35. And so we're right down the list. And in general, I'd say Sweden's handled it pretty well, with a balance between health and the economy. And it seems like the UK is now nudging in that direction. But the worry is, and we were just talking, my colleague here, Letitia's German, and we were just talking about the real differences in some countries where you must have legislation to make people do something, or people do it through common sense. And the Swedish approach has been be sensible. And that's been it. So it's really interesting contrasting it.
I mean, we're somewhere as a nation stuck between sort of northern and the southern Europe, and attitudes tend to be very, obviously, a very multicultural society, and attitudes are very, very broad here. Sort of German mentality in Northern Europe is, if you're told to do something, you kind of do it. In Scandinavia, you do it because you want to do it, because you've got that self control. The Latin territories kind of ignore everything, and we're a mishmash here of people who want to know what to do, and others who basically feel that it's a bit of a nanny state and they want to take control themselves. Richard Medley, are you able to ask something for you, if I may? We lost Richard. I think I've lost him. Oh, he's there. Richard, are you able to come off mute? No. Okay. So I'll go back to Simon. Simon, you had an interjection there, and thank you for
Yeah,
that.
well, it was just following up from Julian's comment and yours. I think having experience of working with a lot of continental businesses, there is a difference between sort of the UK model of an unwritten constitution, I guess, in terms of the legal structure, where basically you can do anything unless there's a law that says you specifically can't do something, and a lot of other countries where there is a constitution which basically says what you can and can't do. And certainly I used to come a cropper with some of my former employers when I would say, well, you haven't told us that you can't do this, so I'm doing it. They said, no, you can't do it because we haven't told you that you can do it, which is a sort of cultural difference. And I think we're fighting that as well to a certain extent, that libertarian view that you can do anything unless there's a law that specifically says you can't do it. In the current times, and I think that's one of the things that Boris struggles with, in terms of setting the right tone and when to legislate and when not to legislate, and his innate desire to allow people to use common sense, but then probably experience and example shows that people tend to, if you give them an inch, they'll take a mile with some of these things.
Yeah, I don't disagree. Okay, well, we've unfortunately come to the end of this this week's session. I'd like to thank our two main presenters for their contributions and for their insights. As always, very illuminating and some really useful takeaways that we can use both to debate around the table and also with our agency colleagues and friends and clients, of course. Just a quick reminder, if I may, we've got a couple of events next week I'd just like to draw your attention to. Both on Thursday. We don't have a Wednesday session next week. Our next Wednesday session's on the 28th of July, but on the 22nd of July, which is next Thursday, we have Las Pimentias, if I get that right, which is a group that's founded by two Pimento ladies, and they are getting together on a monthly basis. The second event I think they're hosting is going to be hosted by Jay Hopkins, who's the CMO at Ultimate Travel Club, and she's an executive coach, and she's going to be looking at some of the recent research around gender parity and female leadership, and some of her experiences on male-dominated boards. They're also going to break into discussion groups and discuss ways that they can support each other and drive change across business more generally. So if you haven't signed up for that, calling out ladies within the network and friends of Pimento, please do so. Isabel can provide you with a link, or Molly can provide you with a link. Just drop them a line. Also, we've got the 5 p.m. club back on Thursday evening at 5 p.m. Oddly enough, this time it's going to be hosted by the Grove Media, an entrepreneurial independent media planning and buying agency. It's currently got offices in London, West Midlands, and in the North. And their agency is principally designed around ambitious, less corporate style business that helps grow strategies firmly anchored in real world planning and buying. And by that, what I mean is good, solid media planning and buying. They're particularly strong in the regional space, as you would have gathered, given their office spread across the UK. They're good people. I like working with them, and they've always got strong opinions. So please do come to that. It's a good networking opportunity. And as ever, we'll break into groups. You get the chance to meet some new members. Try and encourage as many older members of Pimento to come to those events. Since we've got so many new members in the network, it'll be great to get them along. So each of the PDs are working on that to get some fresh faces to that session. It's next Thursday. So that's it for today. Do enjoy the rest of the day. Apparently the sun is out, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. So thank you once again to Annabel and Oliver and everyone else who joined us, and speak to you all very soon. Cheers. Bye-bye.